was going to share. It was funny. On Friday, about lunchtime, I looked at Levi and I said, "Are you hungry?" Well, he turns around, he walks into the dining room, crawls up into his high chair, turns himself around, sits down, and waits for me to strap him in. I said, no, we're going to Sonic to get lunch. It took a little bit to get him to understand. I didn't have food for him. We were going to go get food. So we went and we get to Sonic, we get home, and I'm like, okay, it's time to eat. He goes back, he crawls up in the high chair, sits down, I buckle him in. He eats his food. He gets done, picks up his plate, hands it to me, makes a sign language for done, pushes on his tray, and look at me like, why am I still in here? We're getting a rhythm. It's working out pretty well. I know what he wants. 2 weeks ago, we started a series of messages on the life of David. Our series title is Rising Up, Creating a Legacy of Faithfulness. Rise up. When I picture David, this is a man who rose up. He began as the youngest son of a man who lived in Bethlehem. He's handsome, he sings well, he's a good shepherd. But from that role as a shepherd, from being the youngest son to becoming a war hero, king of the nation of Israel, most importantly, a man who's called a man after God's own heart, that's a big shift. A lot of things happen in David's life. For over 400 years, all the remaining kings of Judah were compared to David. When a new king's introduced in the book of Kings or Chronicles, in multiple instances, they're compared to David. In 2 Chronicles 28:1, it says, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Hundreds of years after David's life, and they're looking back at David's reign saying, well, this particular king did not reign like David. He didn't follow God with that right heart. When Hezekiah became king, the Bible states, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. So David, he's held as this example of faithfulness. Now, David made mistakes. The Bible clearly shows his sins, his flaws. He was not a perfect man. I think sometimes we study the Bible and we look at these heroes of the faith and we view them as so much better than we could ever be. We have a tendency to put them on a bit of a pedestal. In our minds, we can think, well, they did wonderful things for God, but I could never be like them. But the Bible shows us even the best of the heroes still sinned. They struggled. They were like you and I. But they made choices that define them. Choice to have faith in God. A choice is to trust Him, even when the situations looked impossible. The choice to repent, to be humble and say, God, forgive me, I have sinned. The choice to seek God's presence. Choice is to ask God for help, to seek wisdom, to fight for what they believe and what was right. But whatever these choices might have been, these choices position their lives to be used by God. And the incredible thing is we have the ability to make the same choices, which then positions our life to be used by God. In our first message, we talked about having the right heart. Inside Hebrew, the concept of the heart encompasses many things. It's described as the center of our emotion, our thought, our choices, our physical wellness. So it talks about David being a man after God's own heart. The concept is that David, he allowed God to influence, to guide his emotions, the way he responded to these emotions. He surrendered his thoughts and his desires to God. His choices were led by God's wisdom. His heart was right because all these different areas he had surrendered to God. Faithfulness starts with the right heart. It requires a life that's surrendered to Jesus. Jesus, I surrender my thoughts, my dreams, my desires, my priorities, words, actions, all of it to you. We are faithful as Christians when we keep all these things submitted to Him. So in this series, we're asking, what choices did David make? What priorities did he have? How did his words and actions position his life to be faithful to the purpose God had for him? Just like David rose up to pursue that purpose upon his life, just like he chose faithfulness, we are called to rise up, to take action like David, to pursue this life of faithfulness. We began the story of David 2 weeks ago, studying the story where the prophet Samuel anoints him king of the nation. Tonight we're looking at probably one of the most popular and famous stories in all the Bible, David and Goliath. We begin to see a lot of circumstances shift in David's life because of this moment. This is what propels him into the spotlight. He becomes a household name. He becomes a war hero. If they'd had TV and radio back then, he would have had a long string of interviews and segments because everybody would have wanted to talk to David. This moment's pivotal in his life. We're studying his life to glean lessons we can apply on how to leave a life of faithfulness, how to leave a legacy. So if this is one of the most pivotal moments in his life, it would logically mean that we can learn a lot about being faithful, a lot about leaving a legacy of faithfulness from this moment. We're going to look at the story, 1 Samuel 17. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war, and they assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes-dammim between Socoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. Philistines occupied one hill, Israelites the other, and the valley was between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, he came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span, 9 feet tall and 9 inches. He had a bronze helmet on his head, wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. Had 125 pounds of armor." Imagine how big he was if you need 125 pounds of armor. "On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. Its iron point weighed 15 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. So Goliath, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, 'Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul?'" He's already demeaning them. "I'm a Philistine, you're some servants of Saul. Choose a man, have him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, we'll become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man. Let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all Israel were dismayed and terrified. Verse 12, "Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. Firstborn was Eliab, second Abinadab, the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning, every evening, and he just took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, 'Take this ephah of roasted grain, these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers. Hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are. Bring back some assurance from them.' There was Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines." This valley of Elah, it was a natural corridor that led from the coast where the Philistine cities were to the inner part of the land that Israel possessed or had. If the Philistines were allowed to continue up this valley, they would expand far into Israelite territory and begin to cut off and divide the land. The terrain in this valley was very flat, which is why the Philistines were there. Philistines, they used heavy infantry, chariots. This terrain was very advantageous to the military units they had. Socoh and Azekah were 2 high points, which allowed enemy movements to be easily visible by scouts. So both sides have these high points. They're looking at the enemy, they're analyzing the terrain, where's the opponent at? Azekah and Socoh were about 2.5 miles apart, one on each side of the valley. So you have these 2 armies that are facing each other. They each had the high ground on one side of the valley. Whoever goes across the valley floor, tries to charge up the other side, is going to be at a disadvantage. They're going to have to fight uphill. Philistines, now, they would just love to fight on the floor of the valley. They can use their chariots there. Israel doesn't want to go down to the valley floor. They don't want to attack the Philistines. The Philistines don't want to rush up the hill and attack the Israelites. So you have a stalemate. Neither side is gaining 1 inch of ground. If the Philistines were so sure they would win, why did they not attack? If victory was so assured, why wait? See, the Philistines, they really weren't so sure they could win the battle. And time was on their side. They could use Goliath, his challenges, his taunts, do a psychological warfare against Israel. Wear them down, fill their hearts with dread and fear. The Israelites did not have much of a standing army. They were mainly militia. These were men who had farms and land to tend. They couldn't sit there for weeks on end. This was going to be hard on them. They had lives back home, crops to tend. Their morale was going to lower the longer this battle delayed. Philistines just sat there. Let's see how much fear we can cause. Let's see how many Israelites will run home, how many will desert if we just sit here and force them to stay put. The place where they met is Ephes Dammim. The name means boundary of blood or extremity of bloodshed. Some theorize the color of the soil was what gave it this name. Others believe that the amount of blood that had been shed here is how it got its name. This is a place where some battles were fought. And now for 40 days, Israelites, they've done nothing. Enemies invaded. It's on their land. And not 1 acre of territory has been taken back. What I want to look at today is how a legacy of faithfulness in our lives comes from an active faith. Our faithfulness in serving God is only possible if our faith is active. The Apostle James says it this way in his epistle. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. He goes on to say, verse 21, was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar, when he was obedient? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he's called God's friend. See, that person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did. She gave lodging to the spies, sent them off in a different direction. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Active faith means we're putting our faith into motion. I have faith, so I will act. It means we're doing something with our faith. 2 years ago, I believed God was calling me to Memorial Assembly of God Church. So I interviewed, and I worked on that process. I could have all the faith I wanted, but until I took action, until I met with our deacons, until I went through the process, I was never going to get here. I had faith. I believed when I first met Taylor that there was something there, that we could have a long-term relationship, we could get married, that there was a future here. I could have all the faith I wanted, though, until I asked her on a date, asked her to be my girlfriend, told her I loved her, went through all the different things. Nothing was going to happen. You have to have the faith, and you have to do something about it. There has to be an action that accompanies it. You can have faith that you're supposed to pray for that person. Faith that you're supposed to witness to your neighbor. Faith that you should help that person, intercede for this family member. You can believe and have faith that, yes, God is calling you to do it. But it only becomes active faith when you then do it. When you then take that step. Creating a legacy of faithfulness requires a faith that leads to action. Faithfulness is not passive. If your car is in neutral, it's pretty passive. You're not accelerating, going forward or backwards. If you wanted to get out behind the car and push it, you could go somewhere very, very slowly. But now if you put that car into drive, you get the motor on, put your hands on the steering wheel, and you hit that accelerator, then now all the horsepower of that engine is at your disposal. It's action. It's no longer passive. Faithfulness is not passive. It requires choices and action. We need a faith in action. I believe, so because I believe, I'm going to go and do. Came that moment in the middle of the storm. Peter says, Jesus, if it's you, tell me to walk on the water. Jesus said, come. That was a moment of faith. And then Peter said, I'm going to put that faith into action. And he stepped out of the boat. And he started walking on the water. Nothing was going to happen until he walked outside the boat. There had to be a step. There had to be the faith put into action. When Gideon and his 300 men, they broke their jars, blew their trumpets, and shouted, that was faith. They could believe that God was going to deliver the enemy army into their hands, but they still had to act. They still had to shout. There was over 100,000 enemy soldiers. Either God was going to do a miracle or they were dead. Are we going to put it into action? Faithfulness comes from faith that's followed by action. Israel's staring at this Philistine giant who is taunting them. Now, I think at least in some of these Israelites' minds, they believe that God is more powerful than a giant. If you were to just walk up to them and say, is God more powerful than a giant? I think most of them probably would have said yes. They had that reality in their mind. They believed in miracles. They'd seen God do them. But their faith wasn't active. They had a faith or belief in God's ability maybe in their head, but they were not willing to go down there and face Goliath. I believe God can defeat Goliath using somebody else. You go do it. I'll stand here and believe it's possible while you go and do it. God can do it maybe tomorrow. So for 40 days, Goliath is just standing there. He's swaggering around. He's cursing and taunting because nobody's putting faith in action. And then David arrives. Now David, he's excited. How is the battle going? He wants to find out what the casualties are, how much land's been taken, what's been the result. He's ready to hear how well the army's done. And he finds out nothing has happened. Two armies have just sat there for 40 days because everyone's afraid of a giant. Verse 20. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd. He loaded up, he set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their line and facing each other. David, he left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines. He shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites have been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He'll also give his daughter in marriage. He will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine, removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He should defy the armies of the living God. He calls him an uncircumcised Philistine because circumcision was the sign, the visible symbol of the covenant. He's saying this person is not in a covenant relationship with God. They don't have God in their life, and they are defying him. They're defying God's people. Why is this not being stopped? Verse 27, they repeated to him what they've been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are, how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." And David's like, "What did I do to you? Why am I getting yelled at?" Verse 29, "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. The man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. My first point is this: faith changes what you hear. Everyone heard the same taunts that Goliath made, but everyone else heard all this, and it created fear in their hearts. See, they all heard him defy God. They all heard him blaspheme. They heard him mock the Israelite army, challenge them to come fight him. But everyone else, they heard all this, and what they heard was certain death. Come and die. Come be humiliated by a giant that will kill you in 5 seconds. They hear a hopeless match. There's no way we're going to defeat Goliath. David listens to the same taunts, the same curses, the same bragging, and he thinks, who is this giant to think he's more powerful than God? He hears a 9-foot-tall man who thinks he can stand against God's people, steal God's glory, and humiliate God's servants. Everyone else hears a fight to avoid. Let's not go anywhere near Goliath. Run for your lives. David hears a reason to fight. He hears a challenge that needs to be answered. He hears a moment to show, my God is able. Verse 29, the NIV, it says, now what have I done, said David. Can I even speak? He says this to his brother. The King James Version and some other versions put it slightly different. And David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? Whichever version you use, the word here is dabar. It's used 1,400 times in the Bible. Can refer to a word spoken, a matter being discussed, an event. So some believe David's just asking his brother, why are you upset with me? I'm just asking a question. I'm just engaging a conversation. Others believe he's saying, is there not a reason? Is there not a cause? There's a purpose here. Something needs to be done. Faith changes what you hear. To leave a legacy of faithfulness, we must have an active faith, because faith in action changes your perspective. Everyone else heard gloom and doom. The giant's taunting us, and if we do anything, he's going to kill us. Their perspective was one of defeat. So that perspective shaped what they heard. David heard an opportunity to see God move. He heard a cause, something that needed to be resolved. His faith shaped his perspective and how he viewed the situation. Sometimes we face some giants. There's some things in our path. Between us and the promise, between us and where God's taking us, there's some obstacles. Being faithful to God starts with an active faith that shapes our perspective and how we view the moment we're in. Number 2, faith stirs a response. Verse 31. What David said was overheard, reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Faith stirs a response. It gives us that different perspective, and it causes us to say, I'm going to do something about it. David was not willing to say, oh, I know God can, and then do nothing. He knew God could defeat Goliath, so that meant action needed to happen. Grab me a sling, grab me some stones, that giant's going to fall. A life of faithfulness comes from not being able to stay still, not being able to stay quiet and do what we've always done, because we believe God is able. And if God is able, then we need to take some steps of faith. We need to do something. See, this Christian life is not about doing easy things. It's about doing things that other people say is impossible through the power of Jesus Christ. God calls us to be faithful every season, every moment, every day. He asks us to trust Him. Hebrews 11:6 says, and without faith it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe He exists, and He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. We can't be right in His sight. We can't obey God without faith, which means we cannot live a life of faithfulness without an active faith that then takes action. David's remembered as an incredible man of God because of the faith he showed. This moment's pivotal in his life. The victories, the success that God has for you, it's on the other side of the step of faith. And number 3, I close with this. Giants will fall. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with a sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over, saw he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome. He despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, I'll give your flesh to the birds, to the wild animals. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day, Lord, will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day, I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds, the wild animals, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know it's not by sword or spear the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands. As Philistine moved closer to attack him, David, he ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, he took out a stone. He slung it, struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David, he walks down to this little brook in the valley. He hadn't arrived that day planning on using his sling, otherwise he would have had some stones on him. And he picks up 5 stones for a sling. Church, we don't know what tomorrow holds. David didn't know he was going to fight a giant. He got the stone that day on his way to fight him. David, he didn't go through hundreds of stones in a bag saying, let's find the perfect one for this occasion. He bends down, he looks into a creek, and he picks up 5. Here's my point. There will be moments in your life where you don't always feel equipped for what God's calling you to do. You don't feel equipped for the step of faith. Trust that God will provide. That's part of faithfulness. David didn't wake up that morning and pack his best stones for his sling. When he reached the battle site, there was a creek. In that creek was the right size stones at the right place for him to grab them on the way to fight Goliath. God's going to provide what you need. All the past hurts, the challenges, the struggles have prepared you for what is ahead. God's taught you, He's prepared you to face some giants. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have all the answers, because God has it figured out. Our role is obedience. I love that David, he grabbed 5 stones. Now, he wasn't going to have time for 5 tries. Effective combat range on a sling is about 100 to 200 yards. David and Goliath are having a conversation. They're probably yelling it at each other. They're not whispering. But there's not a large distance between them. David doesn't hang back, try his first shot, see the range, how it's going to work. It says he runs at Goliath. He's closing the distance. So if effective range is 100 to 200 yards, let's go with 150 yards. If you're running or jogging, it takes about 18 to 23 seconds to go 150 yards. He's not planning on getting lots of shots off here. So why does he grab 5 stones? Because David's looking beyond the giant. He's looking at what's going to happen next. Some theorize that since Goliath had 4 brothers, David was preparing in case the brothers came down. I don't know if David knew about Goliath's brothers at this point. But I think in David's mind, and you see it when he talks to Goliath, he says, today God's going to defeat the Philistine army. He doesn't just say God's going to defeat you. He says God's going to defeat the whole enemy army. David's getting ready. He's like, I'm going to take down the giant, but I still got 4 stones left. If they have another champion, that one's going to fall too. If they start sending soldiers at me, I've got stones in the bag. We're going to keep fighting. He's preparing for what's coming next. He's being faithful to get ready. God's faithful to us. As we are faithful to him, we will see his power at work in our lives. I love what Paul says in his last epistle before his death. He says, I fought the good fight. I finished the course. I've kept the faith. We're called to leave a legacy of faithfulness. It's created through an active faith. We got to take some action. We will see the reality over and over again in David's life. We all face some giants. We all face some challenges. Life's going to have the hard moments, but in each of them, God is faithful. And our faithfulness to him and his plan makes lasting impact. So the question I leave you with is, what will God do in your life as you have a faith that takes action? Will you stand with me here today?